everybody, welcome to Unscripted, where we're all about inspiring better conversations and helping people think more deeply and critically about faith, life, and leadership. My name's Sam, and I am here. I'm excited because I'm here today with Ryan Kane, who is the athletic director and head basketball coach at Ripon College. It's a big deal. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is exciting.
I love it. I've got the Ripon College mug for you. I've got the Wabash College mug for me.
Yes.
I
like the rivalry we're creating already.
I know. We got to make some. I always wished, like when I was in college, that we had faced Ripon. It just never quite lined up.
Yeah.
Never happened.
Might have to make that happen for you.
I love
that. Might have to get the Little Giants. Is that what they are?
The Little Giants.
Might get the Little Giants up here to Ripon sometime.
Please do it for me. I would
and wear your
that.
bibs? Would you wear your bibs?
I don't have the bibs. I'm not in the
We'll find you
club.
some candy stripe bibs. I mean, it can't be hard. Amazon these days, you get it in 2 days.
I'm sure we could.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on here. I've got a bunch of questions for you.
Sure.
So we'll see if we get through like 3 of them. The first one I have for you is it's all about just this last year. You had a really successful year, like as a college as a whole, with sports and everything. And I thought I'd give you a moment, like, can you just brag for a minute? You don't get permission for that.
Yeah, you don't. And it's funny you asked that question at this moment today as we tape this podcast, because I was recently asked by our advancement staff to kind of do an appeal for this upcoming year for our Red Hawks Club, which is our major fundraising arm for athletics. And they said, give us a couple paragraphs, talk about some of the successes you've had. And I took some time, and I normally don't take time to reflect.
Yeah.
It's normally like, what's next, right? On to the next thing. Great that we did this. And certainly, in the moment, we won men's and women's basketball regular season championships for the first time in school history.
That's amazing.
We won indoor track on men's and women's side for the first time in school history, outdoor track for the first time in school history. I could keep going on and on, right?
Yeah.
So 5 conference championships, 4 coaches of the year, 195 academic all-conference award winners, which is also a school record. And the only reason I know all that is because I looked it up last night.
Yes.
As I was doing this appeal.
I'm so glad that worked.
Yeah. So I'm doing this appeal for our Red Hawks Club, and I'm going back through the annals of our conference's history and our school's history, and I'm starting to recognize, like, this could very well have been like the most successful season in our college's history athletically, you know? And wow.
That's
right?
amazing.
It's amazing.
That's
It's really cool to kind of sit back and reflect on it, and obviously it's always about, what's next again, but, it was pretty cool to kind of sit there and think about, wow, this is pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing. My wife and I and our kids, I'm not a basketball person per se. I grew up wrestling, but it's fun to go to a game and enjoy it. So when you guys were doing the conference championships, boys and girls at the same time, we went to a game or two. And it was so much fun. Like, the stands were packed, people were excited. It was awesome just to watch those games. But I have to say, like, walking away, the thing that I noticed, especially watching you coach and your players play, they're fantastic players, but there was a difference between the way that your players played and acted on the court and a couple of the other teams. The other teams were fine, normal players, but your group acted with so much class and so much humility and so much kindness, even if I can use that word in sports. But it was beautiful to watch, and like, they were encouraging to each other, and I walked away and like, I need to sit down with Ryan and ask this question. So we had coffee a while back, and I kind of just talked about it a little bit, but I want to ask, like, how did you get to the point where you have a culture like that?
Well, I think everything you do is intentional. I think in any walk of any occupation, any walk of life, there's so much you can do. There's so much you have not an unlimited amount of time, but you certainly can only do so much with that time. And I think we're just very intentional about how we approach it. So what's important to us. We have our 5 core values of our program, and I think every coach up and down our hallway all has a similar type of culture with their program. I'm very proud of the way our athletes across the board, the way that they carry themselves, whether they're in the residence halls or they're in the dining halls or on the bus or in the restaurants when they're on the road, and certainly on the fields and courts and tracks that they're competing on. I think every coach, does a pretty good job of it. And I think it's important. It's something I talk about every day. Like, you have to fight for that culture, and it's such a buzzword these days. But you have to fight for your culture every day. You can never take your eyes off it.
Yeah.
And so, you're looking for those kind of key behavioral elements. So, you can talk about, hey, we're going to carry ourselves a certain way, and we're going to celebrate big plays. We're going to, be intentional about when someone comes out of a game and the way that our body language and how we, like, you can talk about those things, but unless you're always walking that and you're correcting it, then there's going to be slippage. And for us, there's no slippage in that.
Yeah.
When I watch film of our team and, we're looking at different things around, strategy and tactics around how do we defend, how do we score. I'm also watching body language. I'm watching how they interact with their teammates after they talk to me when they come out of the game. How are they talking to our assistants? And when we're in a film session, we're not just correcting, hey, you could have did a better job reading this ball screen, or you could have did a better job blocking this person out, right? And I'm not going to get into the weeds on the basketball side, but it's also like, you could have did a better job celebrating when that guy got on the floor to get a loose ball, because we celebrate those things, right?
Yeah.
Stopping a practice and say, why were you standing over there and not celebrating that? Because were you thinking about yourself? Were you thinking about a play that happened previously for you? There's no time in this game to think about those types of things. It's got to be, next play mentality. And, so it kind of goes back to the earlier question, what's next? It's kind of, I feel like I'm always in that mode of what's next, but you gotta be intentional about those things, I think, is the answer.
But that's so interesting, because you're literally looking at film, and the thought that comes to my mind when I'm watching film, or when thinking about what people do when they watch film, they're watching the plays, they're watching the tackles, they're watching, and that's football, obviously.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
You're watching all the things that go into the actual game. You're not watching the bench. But you're watching the bench sometimes.
Always, not sometimes, all the time.
That's amazing, and it's a totally different perspective on how to coach to me, like that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah, and it's not just like correcting, poor behavior or below the line behavior, right? It's also rewarding when it's done well.
Yeah.
Like I'll pause film after the other team scores and say, look at their bench. Do you think they're connected like we are? Look at when we score. Look at our bench. What do you think?
Yeah.
The most connected team always seems to win, in my opinion. I mean, and it's one of our core values. Unity is a core value, and I think it's something you can't overemphasize. Because there's so much about whether you work at a Fortune 500 company, you work at Ripon Community Church, or you work at Roadhouse Pizza. It doesn't matter where you work. Like you got to have some level of like servanthood and understanding that I play a role here, and I'm going to carry out my role, whatever that is. And it might not be what I want it to be, but I'm going to do what's in the best interest of the whole here. And so, I think getting young guys, in my case, as the men's basketball coach, to buy into that is really critical. And, I try not to hit our coaches over their head with this as the athletic director. But, typically when you work inside athletics, you're surrounded by that kind of idea of self-sacrifice and work ethic. And those things are kind of, I guess, standard, if you will, inside our industry.
But what's super interesting about it to me is that it's not the practices, it's not the game day. It's the stuff that happens even lower on the totem pole, what you would think people would prioritize. That's the stuff that actually pays off long term. I'm curious. You've alluded to it catching on with other, or being part of the culture there. So I'm sure you didn't start it, but you also have improved on it and helped encourage it and that sort of a thing. How's that been? Like just playing two roles, right? As a lead basketball coach and then also athletic director.
Yeah, I think for me it's actually been really easy, because I think I prefer to be seen more as a servant leader anyways.
Sure.
And to kind of lead from within. I think it would have been much more challenging for me if I had walked away from being a basketball coach and just been an administrator and just been someone who was leading our department and having to kind of, make standards and talk at our staff in a different way. Like I can easily take off the hat of athletic director and sit with them as a coach and understand the things that they're going through, the struggles, celebrating the successes and knowing how hard it is to get to some of those things. So I think it's been actually a little bit easier for me because it's just more natural. It fits me. And I think a lot of leadership needs to just be genuine. You can't, if there's anything I've learned in studying it, it's, you can read a book or you can talk to somebody who you really admire, but you can't just copy and paste that and make it your own. It still has to be you. It still has to be genuine. And so I think at least I hope anyways, you'd have to have another podcast, some other people to find out, but
yeah, right.
But I mean, ultimately I feel like that's who I am. I'm just trying to be as genuine, as transparent as possible. I mean, I'm that way.
How does it to still be connected to students?
Keeps you young.
No kidding, right?
Yeah, I love it. It really is. I think that's one of the things that I think early on I was going to enjoy about it, but it never fails. Like, if I was to sit down and write an essay about it, I would always talk about the excitement I get. We're 12 days away from kids moving in. Yeah. And when I see families drop off their sons, in my case, right? And I see a mom, crying every time. It's clockwork. Yep. It never gets old for me to see that, to know how much they're entrusting in me to kind of help mentor them. It's part of why they chose to come to Ripon. There's a lot of factors that go into picking a college. And for the ones that are coming to be a student athlete, a lot of it is the coach and the environment they're going to be around. That's the like you said, the teammates that they'll have.
It's the family in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's never lost on me to kind of just see the excitement that they have about like what's going to happen. Who are they today? Who are they going to be when they leave, right? I see it all the time. That's why I often say, why do I coach? My canned answer lately has become the weddings.
Oh gosh, that's great. Yeah,
totally. Because like in the weddings, it's so much about like, wow, like I've seen you come from here all the way to this point now, where you're about to be, a husband, a spouse, a father, whatever it might be, a professional. I've seen that growth, and to be able to play a small part in that is really cool.
That's really neat. I love that answer. I was going to ask that question, like, why do you love to coach? Like, what is the thing? And you already got the answer.
Yeah, I think, and it says a lot about all of it, right? It's just really about the relationships. That's really what you're into it for.
Yeah. It strikes me as this really interesting spot to be in, because it's like a teacher, but it's even a different sense, because when you're coaching somebody, those people spend more time together than anybody else, because you're there every single day for more than an hour. Yep. You are on bus trips together. You have hotel rooms together. You have all the ugliest parts of life. And that's one of the things I was curious about, like as a coach for these young men, when you see them in their rough spot, what's that like?
It's tough. I'll be honest. Mental health is a subject that is obviously becoming more and more prevalent today than ever. And it's something that, again, we can't be great at all of it, right? So one thing that I'm trying to make sure I'm doing a good job of is the mental health aspect of it, giving our student athletes as many resources as possible so that they can handle all of the stresses that they have. We can sit here at our age with our perspective on life and understand how to manage the stresses that enter our lives. But at that age, they're not equipped with it yet. Yeah, and so much about life is trying to gain some level of perspective. We can't give it to them. They've got to make some mistakes. They're going to make some mistakes, and how you handle those situations is going to shape them. Yeah, and how they handle them going forward. And quite honestly, I think all of us coaches feel a ton of pressure on the words that we use, the way that we react to things when they're in those moments are very impactful. And we're not always qualified, quite honestly.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
For
like
sure.
I look back on it and I think to myself, man, what would I have given to maybe just gotten a psychology degree or something? So I had that in the back pocket just to really give them some skills. So, but like anything in life, I just think you go through it enough. I've got enough outcomes and testimonials, if you will, and just experiences with dealing with kids when they're going through stuff. Some of it doesn't change, like the kids of the 90s and the kids of today. Other than maybe the baggy clothes, which is coming back, a lot of it is still the same. They're still going through all the same struggles, right? The academic pressure, the peer pressure, the parental pressure, all that stuff is there. It's just different outlets. And in some ways it's even more so now with the advent of social media. So we try the best we can to give them the tools they can to kind of help those situations, help them get through it. But it's a tremendous responsibility, and not one that I think anybody that gets into this industry should take lightly. Yeah,
that's super interesting. And it's one of those things where you just don't know what you don't know unless you get into it, and you don't know what it's like. I mean, I remember I ran cross country in college, and those were the guys that you went through your highest highs with and lowest of lows with, and it was just, there was that experience with them, and the coach was there too, and it's just wild how that relationship forms. But what's also interesting is how the culture of those teams impacts the school at large. And it seems like there's tons of success. It probably has been a fun school year. Like the dynamic on campus is probably different. I'm curious, is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming out of COVID, everyone was looking for something.
Jonesing for something good.
Yeah,
right?
let me see something good, like, the fact that we were everybody was back in the gym or on the courts again, and celebrating those successes, I think was huge. And one of the interesting aspects about, the culture and the community around Ripon and Ripon College is, it's a strong athletic community. I mean, we've got a lot of student athletes on our campus. So, the idea of Red Hawks supporting Red Hawks is a pretty easy deal. I don't get the sense that there's a ton of animosity. I've been at other campuses where that's the case. When someone's successful and someone else isn't, there's this animosity or resentment, that they don't want to be okay with that, Misery loves company, if you will, but not here. I don't see that. I think everybody wants to see us, a rising ship lifts all boats, right? So a rising tide, is that what it is? We'd have to look that one up.
Let's look that one up.
I'm not good at the catchphrases.
That's good. I appreciate that, though. Okay, I'm curious. You talked about managing struggles and managing them for students. And I know we've chatted because you attend church here, we're part of that. How has faith been something for you? Like, how did you get to the place where you're even here at this church? I'm curious. This is a longer story, but I'd love to hear
No, I think it's great. I mean, I think ultimately, when I sit and talk about a core value for a basketball program, I mean, ultimately, I think a lot of those values come from your faith.
Yeah.
I think, your faith is the bedrock and the foundation for which you're going to build who you are and your character behind. I was raised a Catholic, and grew up in that Sunday church kind of routine. I remember going with my father, every Sunday. My mother was a little more agnostic to church. She was the Christmas, Easter, I don't know what we call those people, but, that was kind of what she would only join us on those masses. But, it gave me a strong foundation and a belief in something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, my faith journey was interesting in that, I went to a Catholic college, but I can tell you that I never attended a single service when I was there. I took 2 semesters of theology, and I kind of knew it all inside and out, and felt like it was guiding, who I was and how I treated people, how I interacted with family, friends, superiors at that time when you're coming up and you're younger, whether it be teachers or coaches, bosses. I felt like all of that was based on like what I had kind of learned on how to be a person through the church. But I think my connection with Jesus was something that I hadn't really dove into.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt like for me, the faith was more about, it was like a bottle of aspirin.
It's a really good analogy.
Like when I needed it, I would go. I always felt like I was welcome in the church, but I was a young professional living in Chicago, moved to Chicago, lived in the big city, and when there were times where I felt a little lost on where I was going on my path, and I wasn't in coaching at the time, I was just trying to make a life. I didn't know, I was just doing whatever I thought I was supposed to do, go get a good job, meet people, travel. I was doing all that, but I was missing something. It was coaching for sure, and that's when I decided to quit my job and get into it. But it was also the faith aspect of it. And then when I moved to Ripon, I was very much about like, okay, I need to connect a little bit more, and so I went to a few more services. And then you have kids, and then it's like, okay, now how do you RJ Dub?
Yeah, how do you represent Jesus well? Yeah, exactly.
How do you do that? And I wasn't sure I could give them that. Like I wanted to be able to educate them on it, and I feel like being a part of this church and coming here has really opened my eyes to like just understanding Jesus better.
Yeah.
Right? Like really taking the passages in the Bible that I know and I've learned and studied, but like really just diving into them deeper and really understanding what they mean and how to apply them to your life.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, you know, when you take it, I'm not someone who's going to beat it over their heads at a basketball team, right?
No, I
right.
understand
But and I actually have talked about it recently with our staff about how, like, you know, we should think about, for those of you that are very strong in their faith, like it impacting and trying to incorporate that in your program. I think there's the right way to do it, knowing that you're going to have a diverse group of people that you're leading, right?
I'm curious, how is that discussion? Because that's super interesting to me. I was even going to say, like, you're not the type that's going to go to your players and say, you've got to believe. Well, you can't do that, for starters. And then two, like, I don't think it's the right way to do it.
Right.
But there is a sense in which you are a person who has this belief, and it forms your character. It forms the kind of way that you lead, servant leadership. And that can be ingrained in there, and it has outcomes that are healthy for the whole program.
Right. And so early on in my career, I worked at an institution that had a faith-based element to it. And so we would lead each team huddle before we took off with a serenity prayer. And there was that aspect to it. And then I remember I was the assistant at the time, and the head coach and I had an interesting conversation about, you know, the guys that were in that locker room, like, it feels like we're kind of forcing them, because we know some of them aren't, you know, they're a little more agnostic or whatever the case may be. And, you know, we were a little bit more intentional about, okay, maybe we shouldn't be hitting them with that. And yet there are institutions out there that's solely what you know, Wheaton College, they ask us to pray after every game, whether you win or lose. They want to pray with you after the game, and that's just a part of who they are. And so I think when you're in that environment, I think it's really easy.
Yeah.
But when you're in an environment that's a little bit more diverse in that way, and it hasn't really established itself, then I think I always make the analogy to having a tool in the shed. So in other words, like, I think there's a lot of tools in the shed to manage whatever it is that you're going through, right? The successes, the failures, whatever the case may be. Like, there's one over here that could be faith. And when I have individual meetings with my guys, some of them talk about, you know, wanting to do more daily devotionals. I always talk about, give me 3 things you're working on.
Yeah.
Right? And it might be their organization, might be their eating, it might be their sleep habits, might be their relationships with a sibling or with a parent. And some of them, they talk about their faith. And, you know, and so for that, I want to be able to say, okay, like,
let's talk about that.
Let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about how we can continue to use that tool.
Yeah, that's really great. Because I think it translates to everybody. I never want to be a church that tries to tell people that this is exactly, you need to come in here and you have to believe this, X, Y, Z, and whatever. This is a place where we're going to try and help people find out who Jesus is and then decide for themselves if they want to follow him. Because Jesus, in principle, is a person that requires you to make a choice for yourself.
Yeah.
In principle, like, that's who he is. So we can't, like, force that on somebody.
Right.
But when you're around a group of people who have that and they choose to do it and follow it, it's infectious and good. It's like you can't help but wonder, why is that there?
It's healthy.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels like it's the only way, you know?
Yeah.
Like, for anybody to say, like, this is the way we're going to do it I think it's a little nearsighted. Yeah. I think, you know, I think the most successful programs, and I'm relating your comment back to my world inside, you know, let's say basketball, the most successful programs are player-led programs. Yeah. They're not coach-led programs. Like, I don't want 45 minutes of head nods. Like, if I'm talking to you and I'm over and over and over and you're just doing this, I get it. Like, how about you tell me? Right?
Yeah.
What do you believe?
Yeah.
What are you into? Are you into what we just talked about? You know, a little bit more, asking more questions and allowing them to take ownership, right? And then I think that gets you a little more buy-in and gets you that following. And
I like that a lot. I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit more about how you make your program player-led more so?
Well, I think it's intentional. You know, you try to let them know. I think it's a little easier. We have 19 weeks by NCAA rules where I can actually coach them. So if you think about it, in a 52-week year, 33 weeks, I'm not really in charge.
Yeah.
Right? Like, where I can't be with them. And in particular, there's about a solid 15 or so weeks of the year where they're doing things together without me leading it. They have to lead it. And those are the most critical times, right? I mean, anybody's growth, as a cross-country runner, I mean, you're going to see some growth during the season, right? But you've got to periodize your training.
The only way you grow is if you ran in the summer.
That's right. And so, the accountability that goes into that is usually peer-related. And, I don't know. I mean, I'm early on in my parenting, but it's like they're not always going to listen to me either as a parent, right?
The rule is the opposite. They're not. All right. Every once in a while they'll listen to you. Most of the time they don't.
and so I'll get parents who will say, will you talk to Johnny or Jimmy about this?
Oh yeah, totally.
And it's like you can reach him. I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess. And so I guess that's kind of part of it, right? Like the peer aspect of it, the accountability, is important. And so I think developing leaders is important. So identifying them early on. So we have a leadership council that, consists of a sophomore, junior, senior, and then one person regardless of class. And so I want them, they vote on it, right? They identify who they think is the leader. I don't always agree with it, right? It's sometimes, like most things inside the world of sports, it's always like, well, whoever's the most popular, whoever's the best, or the most talented, it's usually who gets those votes. But if you can take that person who is the best and create a better leader out of them, well, now you've got a real winner, right? Because they're not qualified to lead a basketball program, right?
No.
I'm trying to get them to get on the same level as me. So I'm trying to lift them, empower them, have them understand. I mean, the hardest thing to do is to walk into a locker room and think about somebody other than yourself.
Yeah.
When you're an athlete. I mean, your competitiveness is just immediately geared towards that. And so how do you do that? I mean, you gotta self-awareness, right? How do you quit smoking? You gotta be self-aware. How do you quit chewing your nails? You gotta be self-aware. There's things that you do that in order to make any real change, you have to have some sort of self-awareness.
Yeah.
So you need to make them aware that this is an important aspect. And so I think that's really part of it, is just, like I said, being intentional, identifying who those people can be, and then molding them. Yeah. And, there's some kids that are awesome at it. Like some kids I don't have to give a lot of mentoring to be great at that. And then there's others that are. And when we do our leadership meetings, it's weekly early on, and leadership is it's a huge topic, right?
Yes.
There's so many layers under it,
absolutely.
Right? So, are you going to be an enforcer? Are you going to be someone who's more relational? Are you going to be someone who's a conflict resolution? And so what we do is we talk about like, well, who are you? What are you best at? And we take these assessments to understand like, all right, someone has to be good at this role. You can't be all of them,
no.
But collectively you guys can be one really good leader. Right?
Yeah,
someone who's going to be my connector, someone who's going to be my enforcer, someone who's going to be my confidence builder.
Yeah.
Right? So that when someone's struggling, they go to that person. So they don't feel like one person has to do it all.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting. It's fun to watch you do this in a way that makes it so the students are leading, the students are owning it for themselves. And then there's this self-correcting thing that happens. It all does it itself. And that's really cool. I like the way that you've molded that. And also it's not like it's always the seniors. I love how it's different classes. And you have this reality that there's somebody there that you can relate to maybe a little bit more, whether it's age or personality. You have all the things covered. And that's
I think that's a great point because, like this year, and for instance, we have a kid who got voted on for the first time as a senior to be a leader, and no way in shape or form I would have ever thought that as a freshman, as a sophomore, even as a junior. But I've seen such a transformation in this individual's personality over the course of the last 12 months, basically, as they went through their junior year, that their peers recognized it as well. And I was like, completely, happy for this individual too, that they recognize like, everyone runs their own race.
Yeah.
Another cross-country analogy for you. Sam.
They're all over the place.
But everybody runs their own race. Some people come along quicker than others. Some, whatever the case may be, right? Everybody comes from a different background.
Yeah.
And they all have their own story, and they all are running their own race. And you have to have some patience with some, and others you can push them and accelerate their growth because they're ready for it. And others you got to just let them figure it out,
Yeah. Absolutely. That's really, really true. Man, this is so good. I so appreciate it. We could talk all day, but we're getting to the end of our time slot. So,
I love it.
Thank you so much for chatting. Thanks for being in this community and leading it like you do. I appreciate that. I love this town and love that you're leading at the college, and I'm just grateful for you. Thank you.
And vice versa. The Love Fest is on, so grateful for you, Sam, and having me on, and for all you do for our community and certainly for the church. So thank you.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Have a good week, everybody.